May 1945 arrives not with gunfire, but with bells. Across Europe, church towers speak again. Flags appear in windows that had been dark for years. Crowds gather in streets still powdered with brick dust. The war in Europe is over. But in the quiet spaces between celebrations, General George S. Patton studies a map that no longer looks finished. Germany has collapsed inward, its armies dissolved, its cities broken open. What remains is not peace, but space, a vacuum where power once stood. From the east, the Red Army occupies that space with methodical certainty, its fronts now lines, its lines becoming borders. Patton does not see an ally pausing after victory. He sees mass continuing to move, like water finding its level. To Patton, time itself is a weapon, and it is already being lost. In May, the American army is at its peak. Hardened divisions, intact logistics, commanders who know how to move fast and hit hard. But he knows what comes next. Demobilization. Trains pointed west. Units thinned, then dissolved. Strength measured in months, not years. Every day of peace is a day of subtraction. Inside Allied headquarters, the atmosphere changes. Orders no longer race forward with tanks. They circulate slowly, stamped and restamped. Victory turns administrative. Maps are replaced by forms, movement by procedure. Patton feels the war cooling, not ending but settling, like embers covered too early. He has spent his life in motion, and now he senses momentum bleeding away. There is also something else in the air, a moral aftertaste. The Allies fought for liberation, for the language of freedom and choice. Yet the new occupation lines harden quickly, turning promises into zones. Eastern Europe does not feel liberated so much as reassigned. To Patton, the geometry of post-war Europe begins to resemble confinement, new cages drawn with diplomatic rulers. It is here, in this uneasy stillness, that Patton forms the thought no one is supposed to say aloud. If the next enemy is the Soviet Union, if confrontation is only delayed, not avoided, then the defeated German military represents not ideology, but material. Men, staff work, roads, habits of war. Yesterday's enemy, repurposed. The logic is cold. The implications are colder. The celebrations continue outside. Inside, Patton keeps his counsel. Because in peacetime, the most dangerous thing is not an army, but a soldier who already has a plan for the next war. And somewhere beyond the silence of victory, that plan is waiting for a listener. The war has ended, yet Europe refuses to settle. In the spring of 1945, a new crisis flares at the northeastern edge of Italy, around the port city of Trieste. It is not Berlin or the Rhine. It is a place most Americans could not find on a map. But it sits at the fault line between armies that have stopped shooting and those that have not stopped calculating. Patton is recalled into the picture, not to defeat a beaten enemy, but to participate in something stranger, a bluff. Yugoslav forces under Josip Broz Tito push toward the city, asserting claims born of resistance and bloodshed. British and American commanders respond with firmness carefully measured to avoid gunfire. Patton is told explicitly that this is not a war. It is a demonstration, a posture. He finds the distinction thin. To him, the act of moving troops is already a language of violence, even when spoken softly. In briefings and private remarks, Patton speaks of starting a new war with unsettling ease, not as provocation, but as inevitability. War, in his mind, is not a moral failure. It is the natural mechanism by which disorder is corrected. The idea that peace can be preserved by restraint alone strikes him as hopeful, not serious. Along the Enns River, American and Soviet forces face one another across narrow crossings and wider silences. Nothing happens, and yet everything feels possible. A misread signal, a nervous sentry, a convoy that does not stop in time. The river becomes an imagined boundary where bluff could become blood in seconds. For Patton, this is proof, not danger. Proof that the next conflict is already rehearsing itself. He begins to wonder aloud whether Tito is acting alone, or whether Yugoslavia is merely the forward edge of something larger. A probe, a test of nerve directed from Moscow. Patton believes power respects only clarity. Any hesitation, any softness at the perimeter, becomes instruction for the next move. Here, the shift becomes visible. Today's incident will define tomorrow's expectation. Patton obsesses over precedents because he understands how quickly temporary arrangements harden into rules. Eisenhower understands this too, but differently. Eisenhower believes stability comes from discipline, from holding lines without inflaming them. Patton believes stability comes from readiness, from convincing the other side that escalation will be met instantly and decisively. Peace, on paper, has been declared. But on Europe's borders, power still moves like armor, slow, heavy, and always forward. And the bluff at Trieste leaves behind a question that refuses to fade. If this is peace, why does it already feel like a rehearsal? Patton's certainty no longer lives only in conversation. It moves onto paper. In private notes and diary entries written in the weeks after Germany's surrender, his language sharpens. He convinces himself not only that conflict with the Soviet Union is likely, but that it is winnable, and that delay will only make it harder. The U.S. Army, he believes, has never been stronger than it is at this moment. If war must come, he reasons, it should come before strength dissolves into memory. He dismisses the instruments of peace with open skepticism. Rules, committees, votes. These strike him as tools for those who have forgotten what enforces order when agreements fail. Patton is an old soldier in a new political world, and he does not trust that world to hold. To him, negotiation without credible force is a pause, not a solution. In his calculations, Soviet power is impressive but inflated. He sees mass where others see strategy, numbers where others see doctrine. The Red Army, in his view, is tired, overextended, dependent on momentum rather than flexibility. Against it, he places American combined arms warfare, mobility, air power, logistics, command initiative, a machine refined by years of movement and fire. He believes this system, applied decisively, could shatter Soviet formations before political paralysis sets in. Yet the most revealing moments come away from headquarters. Patton drives through countryside newly quiet, hills green again, villages intact by accident rather than design. He cannot see them as places of rest. His eye measures roads, valleys, river crossings. Beauty registers only as terrain. The war has taught him how to see, and it will not let him unlearn. From other desks, other concerns emerge. Eisenhower and Bradley think about men who have already given enough, about morale stretched thin by victory itself, about discipline in an army asked to imagine another enemy before the last graves have settled. These doubts reach Patton only as resistance, not as warning. The engine driving him is simple and relentless. Patton does not fear war. He fears hesitation, moments where resolve softens into debate and advantage drains away while leaders decide what the moment requires. To him, indecision is the true catastrophe. By writing it down, Patton fixes his future in ink. He is already living in the next war, mapping its logic, rehearsing its arguments. Around him, the world is ending one conflict and reaching for peace. The distance between those two states is widening, and soon someone will have to decide which vision governs what comes next. Patton's premise is not ideological, it is logistical. Germany is beaten, but not erased. Its roads still run where they always have. Its rail lines still bind the center of Europe together. Its officer corps, though disgraced, still understands movement, supply, and command. To Patton, dismantling this structure feels less like justice and more like waste. If geography is destiny, then Germany sits exactly where the next struggle would be decided. In his thinking, German units are stripped of history and reduced to function. Not Nazis, but formations. Not crimes, but capabilities. Rifles stacked in depots. Staff officers who know how to plan marches and manage fuel. Discipline learned the hard way. He sees an already trained mass that could be repurposed faster than any new force raised from scratch. War, as Patton understands it, rewards readiness, not sentiment. Morality, in this logic, becomes a question of timing. If the Soviet Union turns openly hostile, and Patton believes it will, then the West will regret every day spent disarming potential strength. He frames the problem not as right versus wrong, but now versus later. The moment of maximum advantage, he insists, never returns once surrendered. Delay is not neutrality. It is decay. Patton speaks of Germans as rehabilitatable, a word that suggests both efficiency and familiarity. He believes cultures can be sorted by temperament, that some peoples understand order and hierarchy in ways others do not. It is an assumption rooted less in evidence than in instinct, belief standing in for proof. In this view, the German soldier is not irredeemable, merely misdirected. Redirect him, and the problem is solved. But beneath the simplicity lies a quiet arrogance. Patton assumes the world will accept this reversal as cleanly as a change in orders, that survivors will distinguish between yesterday's enemy and today's ally because strategy demands it, that graves can be contextualized, that liberation can be recalibrated without consequence. It is a confidence born of command, where decisions are executed before they are debated. Victory has reinforced this habit. On the battlefield, force has resolved dilemmas faster than politics ever could. When obstacles appeared, Patton pushed through them. When resistance hardened, he hit harder. The war has rewarded decisiveness again and again, teaching him that momentum is moral in itself. To stop, to hesitate, feels like betrayal of everything that worked. Yet the irony sits quietly at the center of the proposal. The simple fix depends on forgetting what the war was fought to prove. That some systems cannot be reused without consequence. That legitimacy, once broken, cannot be issued again by command. That the line between practicality and erasure is thin and easily crossed. Patton does not see these doubts as wisdom. He sees them as weakness dressed up as conscience. To him, the future is already pressing in, impatient with memory. But the easier a solution appears, the more it demands the sacrifice of meaning. And as his idea takes shape, another question begins to form in the minds of those listening. Not whether it could work, but what it would cost to try. In Patton's strategic imagination, Europe after victory is already unbalanced. Britain is drained by 6 years of total war, its empire thinning under the weight of debt and exhaustion. France is liberated but battered, its infrastructure torn open, its political confidence fragile. To Patton, neither can serve as a firm barrier against pressure from the East. Only Germany, central, industrial, disciplined, possesses the mass and position to stand if the Soviet tide continues forward. This belief leads him to an unsettling inversion. The very qualities that made Germany dangerous in war now make it, in his view, indispensable in peace. The Germans know how to fight, how to organize, how to endure. Competence, not contrition, becomes their currency. In Patton's calculus, effectiveness itself begins to resemble redemption, a passport back to usefulness before repentance is complete. The reality of occupation gives this logic daily reinforcement. In cities reduced to stone and ash, Allied authorities need men who know how systems functioned before collapse. A German official, once a cog in the old order, is summoned to help restore power, reopen transport, keep food moving. He is not celebrated. He is tolerated. And in that tolerance lies the first compromise, small but irreversible. The war may be over, but it cannot erase experience. Patton's mind arranges people into functional categories. There are ideological criminals, those he believes should be punished and removed. And there are administrators, technicians, officers whose skills are too valuable to discard. On paper, the distinction seems clean. In practice, the lines blur immediately. Party membership overlaps with competence. Survival required accommodation. Judgment becomes situational, not absolute. As this friction grows, Patton's patience for denazification thins. He begins to see it not as justice, but as delay. A moral luxury the coming confrontation with the Soviet Union will not permit. Every removed official, every disbanded structure, feels to him like self-inflicted weakness. He believes history is accelerating, and that idealism will be the first casualty. Here the listener encounters the deeper trap. Stability is rarely built with perfect instruments. It is assembled with what remains, with people shaped by compromised pasts. But each compromise carries a residue, a future reckoning postponed rather than avoided. What is tolerated for order today becomes the source of unease tomorrow. By now, Patton's idea has expanded beyond force structure. Rearming Germany is not just a military solution. It is a statement about forgiveness without confession, utility without moral repair. It reflects a worldview in which the future outweighs the past, and effectiveness outweighs absolution. To Patton, second chances are earned through usefulness, not reflection. This is the quiet pivot. What began as strategy is becoming philosophy. And as Patton pushes this vision forward, others begin to realize that the argument is no longer only about tanks and divisions, but about who is allowed to return to history and on what terms. Eisenhower's instinct, sharpened over years of coalition warfare, is alignment. Victory in Europe was not achieved by force alone, but by coherence, keeping allies moving in the same direction, keeping policy synchronized with power. He understands how fragile that alignment is once the common enemy disappears. A single reckless decision, a unilateral shift in purpose, could fracture the peace before it has time to harden. He also understands something more basic. America did not fight its way across the Atlantic and through France to improvise a second crusade at the moment of surrender. The war was sold to the public as necessary, limited, and moral. It was justified as a response to aggression, not as a standing condition of global order. Eisenhower knows that legitimacy, once spent, cannot be easily replenished. To him, legitimacy is not abstract. It functions like a weapon system. It multiplies strength, binds allies, reassures populations, and constrains enemies. Without it, even the most complete military victory begins to corrode. Cynicism replaces trust. Allies hedge. The meaning of sacrifice blurs. Eisenhower has watched this dynamic before, in smaller theaters, and he recognizes the early signs. Patton's proposal strikes him as more than aggressive. It sounds like an admission that the moral verdict of the war can be revised by convenience, that the distinction between liberation and domination is negotiable if the strategic situation changes quickly enough. To Eisenhower, this is not flexibility, it is erosion. Around them, aides and staff officers feel the tension without needing it explained. This is not a dispute over divisions or deployments. It is an argument about limits, about whether war can be ended cleanly or whether it inevitably demands continuation. The men in the room understand that whatever is decided here will echo far beyond Germany's borders. Eisenhower's calculations stretch past the map table. He thinks about Congress, already pressing for demobilization, about allies who have endured occupation and now watch American decisions for signs of consistency, about families who have measured the war in letters and graves, and who believe, reasonably, that the promise of victory included an ending. These are not sentimental considerations. They are structural realities. Where Patton sees restraint as blindness, Eisenhower sees it as discipline. Where Patton fears hesitation, Eisenhower fears rupture of alliances, of trust, of purpose. He does not deny the Soviet threat. He simply refuses to answer it by undoing the meaning of what has just been won. To turn immediately from one enemy to another, using the defeated as instruments, would collapse cause and consequence into a single, endless justification for force. For Eisenhower, war must end in a way that resembles how it began. The reasons must still make sense when the guns fall silent. Otherwise, victory becomes indistinguishable from momentum, power continuing to move simply because it can. This is the fault line now visible to everyone involved. Patton believes history punishes restraint. Eisenhower believes history punishes betrayal of purpose. Both men are thinking about the future, but only one is willing to let the war's moral boundary move with it. Patton counts strength the way soldiers always have, in tonnage moved, divisions ready, guns that answer when called. Eisenhower counts something less visible and far more fragile: votes, treaties, consent that exists only as long as it is believed in. One measures power as mass, the other measures it as permission. In the space between those measures, the post-war world begins to take shape. Demobilization arrives quietly, without ceremony. Orders go out, units are thinned, equipment is mothballed, then forgotten. Men who crossed continents now count the days until ships carry them home. Patton watches this process like a leak he cannot seal, capability draining away drop by drop, irretrievable once lost. What took years to assemble is undone in weeks, not by defeat, but by relief. At checkpoints along the new frontiers, the Red Army is everywhere. Its presence is not aggressive, but it is overwhelming. Columns stretch beyond sight. Numbers press on the imagination. For Western soldiers, the mass feels less like an opposing force than a condition, something elemental, like weather. It does not threaten, it waits. And waiting itself becomes pressure. With shooting finished, intelligence replaces firepower. Estimates circulate. Rumors harden into assumptions. Intentions are inferred from movement, from silence, from what is not said. The next war, if it comes, will begin in uncertainty rather than artillery. Men argue over capability and intent, knowing that being wrong could mean catastrophe, and being cautious could mean weakness. Here, both generals believe they are innovating. Patton's answer is strategic opportunism. Use the moment, use what exists, act before advantage expires. Eisenhower's answer is restraint under provocation. Hold the line, deny escalation its spark, refuse to let fear dictate policy. Each sees the other's approach as dangerous. Each believes history favors decisiveness, only they define it differently. The cost of this argument is not abstract. A veteran hears the word home and feels something loosen inside him. He cannot imagine another enemy, another winter, another set of graves. Whatever the calculations above him, his war is finished. Democracies are built from such limits, from what citizens will endure, not what planners can envision. This is the new reality settling in. The West is not choosing between war and peace, but between different kinds of readiness. In a world where conflict cannot be declared without consequence, the most powerful weapon is not a division or a doctrine, but the amount of strain a democracy is willing to sustain before it breaks. And that question, unanswered, now hangs over everything that follows. Occupation quickly reveals a problem no victory parade can solve. Germany does not only need guards and checkpoints, it needs administrators, police chiefs, engineers, men who know how water flows through pipes and trains move through junctions. Yet experience, in the Third Reich, was rarely neutral. The most capable officials almost always passed through the party system in some form, sometimes as believers, sometimes as survivors, sometimes as opportunists. Purity is scarce in a defeated state. Patton argues from inevitability. He insists that it is impossible to remove every compromised official without paralyzing daily life. A city cannot be governed by absence. Roads do not repair themselves. Food does not distribute by moral intention alone. To him, demanding complete separation between competence and contamination is a fantasy that risks turning victory into chaos. Eisenhower's system answers differently. Denazification is not only administrative, it is declarative. It exists to prove that the war did not merely change borders, but meaning. The Nazi structure must be dismantled visibly and decisively, so no one can mistake continuity for reform. Governance, in this view, must carry moral clarity, even if it moves more slowly. The point is not speed, but transformation. On the ground, this debate becomes personal and procedural. A man sits at a desk, not a courtroom. His past is reduced to forms, membership cards, affidavits, witness statements. A stamp lands on paper, category assigned, employment denied or permitted. Gunfire has been replaced by bureaucracy, but the consequences remain heavy. A career ends. A family's future shifts. Justice now speaks in carbon copies. Patton watches this process with mounting anger. He feels himself conscripted into something he despises, not war, but moral accounting. He believes he is being asked to execute a society administratively, to strip it of function, while demanding it recover at the same time. To rebuild Germany quickly, he needs its machinery intact. Instead, he is told to dismantle first, then explain why stability is slow to return. For Eisenhower, this discomfort is not incidental, it is necessary. Denazification is both justice and instrument. It cleanses, but it also controls. It reminds the defeated who now holds authority, and on what terms legitimacy will be granted back. The process is imperfect, sometimes blunt, sometimes unjust in its own way. But Eisenhower believes the alternative, quiet continuity, would be worse. A rebuilt Germany that never confronts its rupture would carry the past forward intact. The tension tightens because neither side is entirely wrong. Denazification does remove criminals. It also removes function. Pragmatism does restore order. It also blurs accountability. Each approach solves one problem by deepening another. And in the space between policy and execution, frustration accumulates. Patton does not keep this frustration private. His comments sharpen, his metaphors harden. He speaks as a soldier trapped in a moral maze built by civilians who will not accept the costs of their own standards. Policy, however, is now the battlefield, and words are weapons. As the occupation deepens, one truth becomes unavoidable. Patton's mouth moves faster than policy can absorb. And in a war that has shifted from fire to legitimacy, that imbalance is about to matter. Patton has never softened his language for comfort. In conversation and interview alike, he relies on blunt analogies, sorting moral categories the way others sort factions on a map. He speaks of Nazis and non-Nazis as if they were political alignments, of ideology as something that could be weighed against utility. To him, the words feel efficient, clear, unsentimental, soldierly. To those listening, they land differently, not as precision, but as provocation. The press does what it always does in moments of transition. It condenses. A sentence becomes a headline. A headline becomes a signal carried far beyond its original meaning. Nuance is stripped away. Context dissolves. What remains is shock. In the fragile atmosphere of occupation, those shocks ricochet outward, becoming diplomatic shrapnel that wounds alliances already under strain. Inside Eisenhower's headquarters, the shift is immediate and unmistakable. Patton is no longer discussed as a battlefield asset, but as a variable that cannot be controlled. His achievements are not forgotten, but they are set aside. The question is no longer what he can accomplish, but what he might undo with a careless phrase. Stability, once defended by divisions, now depends on restraint. At the heart of the conflict lies a clash of convictions. Patton believes honesty is duty, that plain speech is a form of respect, and that truth loses force when it is padded for politics. Eisenhower believes discretion is duty, that leadership requires knowing when not to speak, and how silence can preserve what words might destroy. Both men see themselves as guardians of integrity. They simply disagree on its form. Among the officer corps, admiration turns complicated. Men who followed Patton through fire still revere his instincts in battle. They credit him with speed, courage, and clarity under pressure. But now, in the political afterlife of war, those same officers begin to worry. They sense that the qualities that made Patton indispensable in combat may render him dangerous in peace. The lesson unfolding is a modern one. Media is no longer a background noise. It is a front line. Reputations are contested there. Authority is weakened there. A general can be outflanked without an enemy in sight, defeated not by force, but by amplification. The microphone becomes more consequential than the map table. Patton does not adjust. He believes correction is capitulation. Eisenhower does not confront him publicly. He believes discipline must be quiet to be effective. The distance between them widens, no longer over strategy, but over trust. By now, the outcome is taking shape. The decision will not be argued in the open. It will be made privately, implemented formally, and felt immediately. The stage is set for a refusal Patton will not hear in person, and a consequence the world will see. When Patton finally gives his idea structure, he does so without flourish. There is no rhetoric about vengeance, no language of ideology. The proposal is delivered as logistics and necessity. German manpower, he argues, should remain organized rather than dispersed. Experience should be preserved rather than erased. In the geography of Europe, Germany is not an abstraction. It is the ground on which any future conflict with the Soviet Union would be decided. Ignoring that, he believes, is strategic negligence. He insists this is not about absolution, it is about balance. Ideology, in his view, is secondary to power and position. Armies move through terrain, not arguments. The Red Army's presence in Central and Eastern Europe is not symbolic, it is physical. To counter it, the West must think in similar terms. Germany's defeat has created opportunity as much as obligation, and Patton believes refusing to exploit it would be an act of self-harm. To Eisenhower, the implications land immediately. This proposal would not merely extend the war's logic, it would invert its meaning. Liberation would slide into preemptive coercion, justified not by aggression suffered, but by aggression anticipated. The moral clarity that sustained the alliance through years of sacrifice would fracture under that weight. What was framed as defense would begin to resemble initiation. Patton presses on timing. History, he argues, does not wait for consensus. If conflict comes years from now, the West may face it hollowed out. Armies demobilized, publics unwilling, alliances strained by distance and doubt. The moment of unity and strength is fleeting. Strategy, to Patton, is the art of acting before opportunity closes, not after danger becomes obvious. The room absorbs these arguments in silence. Men who have buried friends listen without interruption. Cemeteries sit just beyond memory, their rows too recent to abstract. For them, the idea of reassigning the enemy, of turning yesterday's killers into tomorrow's partners, does not compute easily. The silence is not procedural, it is human. Eisenhower does not raise his voice. He does not debate Patton point by point. His face carries the response before words are spoken. This is a commander who won by discipline, by holding together forces with different languages, histories, and wounds. He understands how close that unity always was to collapse. To ignite a new confrontation now, using the defeated as instruments, would tear open every seam he spent the war holding closed. In that moment, the contrast between the two men becomes unmistakable. Patton offers a shortcut through the uncertainty of peace, decisive, efficient, morally compressed. Eisenhower refuses to let the meaning of victory be rewritten so quickly or so conveniently. He believes that some endings must be honored before new beginnings are contemplated. The proposal hangs in the air, fully formed and fully rejected, even before the refusal is made explicit. One man has placed the future on the table. The other is preparing to say no, not to danger, but to the method offered to confront it. Eisenhower's refusal does not arrive as a speech, and it does not need quotation marks. It is expressed through authority quietly exercised. Commanders, he makes clear, do not invent grand strategy after surrender, especially not a strategy that would restore legitimacy to the defeated before the meaning of defeat has settled. The war has ended under specific terms for specific reasons. Those reasons are not negotiable simply because the future feels uncertain. He anchors the post-war mission with deliberate simplicity. Stabilize, occupy, rebuild. These are not placeholders while waiting for the next conflict. They are the fulfillment of the one just concluded. To move beyond them without public mandate would be to create a new war by administrative drift. One the American people never debated, never authorized, and never agreed to fight. Eisenhower rejects the idea that speed can justify moral inversion. Acting quickly, he believes, is not the same as acting wisely. The legitimacy earned through sacrifice is fragile, and once broken, it cannot be repaired by efficiency or force. To him, legitimacy is the only durable form of victory, the one that survives demobilization, elections, and memory. Patton hears this refusal as delay, as hesitation dressed up as caution. Eisenhower hears something else entirely. He hears catastrophe, alliances splintering, publics recoiling, the moral architecture of victory collapsing under the weight of expediency. The two men are reading the same future, but through different wounds. One fears weakness, the other fears meaninglessness. The crucial distinction emerges here. Eisenhower does not deny the Soviet threat. He does not dismiss the tension gathering across Europe. He simply denies Patton's answer to it. The danger, in his mind, does not justify rewriting the verdict of the war so soon or so casually. Preparation must not become provocation. Defense must not become initiation. For Patton, the effect is suffocating. His frustration turns inward. He feels restrained rather than directed, silenced rather than corrected. To him, leadership means action, and refusal feels like abdication. The sense that history is slipping past while he is ordered to stand still gnaws at him. He does not see a boundary. He sees a blindfold. Eisenhower, however, understands the weight of restraint differently. He knows that not every command moves armies forward. Some exist to stop movement entirely, to hold the line not against an enemy, but against momentum itself. To say no when saying yes would be easier and more immediately satisfying. This is the meaning of Eisenhower's refusal. It is not a lack of imagination, but an assertion of limits. Not fear of conflict, but fear of endless justification. Sometimes the most decisive command a general can give is not to advance, but to forbid action and let peace endure long enough to matter. Patton's remarks on denazification do not fade. They accumulate. Each interview, each quoted comparison, erodes confidence in the occupation's moral coherence. What had been an administrative process now appears, through his words, as arbitrary and vindictive. Allies begin to ask whether American authority in Germany is guided by principle or impatience. The legitimacy Eisenhower guards so carefully starts to wobble, not because of policy, but because of voice. Eisenhower responds not as a rival, but as a coalition commander. He does not debate Patton in public. He does not correct him line by line. He identifies the disturbance and moves to contain it. The priority is not punishment, but preservation. The larger structure, the alliance, the occupation, the fragile peace, must remain intact, even if it means sidelining one of its most famous architects. Patton experiences this discipline as betrayal. To him, restraint looks like fear, and silence like surrender. He believes that the truth is being softened to appease politicians and foreign sensitivities. Eisenhower sees something else entirely. In this phase of war, Patton is no longer an asset to be unleashed, but a liability that draws fire. The battlefield has shifted, and Patton has not adjusted his footing. The solution arrives dressed as routine. Patton is not fired. He is reassigned, moved to a quieter command, removed from the center of occupation policy, given work that carries honor but little influence. The legend is preserved. The damage is reduced. It is a compromise that spares reputations while redirecting authority. For Patton, the blow is intimate. After years of motion, of pursuit, encirclement, advance, he finds himself surrounded by files. After commanding armies, he is handed history. Reports replace orders. Archives replace roads. The humiliation is not loud, but it is total. He has not been defeated by an enemy. He has been contained by procedure. This moment marks a turning point not just for Patton, but for the nature of command itself. In wartime, mistakes can be corrected by force, by speed, by courage under fire. In peacetime, words linger. They cannot be recalled. They echo beyond intent, shaping perceptions that outlast any clarification. The general who mastered movement has stumbled over meaning. Eisenhower understands the cost of this decision. He knows that legends do not fade quietly, and that resentment will follow Patton wherever he goes. But he also understands something colder. The occupation cannot afford to look improvisational. It cannot appear to renegotiate the moral outcome of the war through loose speech. Stability now depends on discipline of tone as much as discipline of force. The lesson settles slowly. In peacetime, a sentence can do more damage than a failed maneuver. A metaphor can undermine what divisions once secured. The instruments of authority have changed, and not all warriors adapt in time. This is the climax's final note. Patton does not fall in combat, nor through disobedience. He falls in the argument about what victory means after the shooting stops. And as his power recedes, another question emerges: whether history will remember him as a prophet restrained too soon or a danger contained just in time. Patton's reassignment drains him of what he understands best: motion. The general who once lived by momentum is now confined to desks, tasked with studying campaigns already concluded. He commands no formations, issues no operational orders. His new army is made of paper, reports, maps annotated after the fact, history written while the future moves elsewhere. For a man shaped by advance, this stillness feels like erasure. Across Europe, the temporary lines of victory begin to harden. Occupation zones acquire permanence. Checkpoints become borders. What was meant as administration starts to resemble destiny. The continent settles into a divided posture, its balance no longer measured by offensives, but by systems, currencies, governments, alliances forming in parallel rather than together. The war is over, but its geometry is becoming permanent. As Soviet-West tension grows, Patton's earlier warnings begin to circulate again, not as proposals, but as prophecy. Readers return to his words with new eyes, tempted by the clarity of hindsight. He had seen the rivalry early. He had named the danger. In a climate of rising suspicion, foresight becomes attractive, even when its prescriptions remain troubling. There is a quiet shift underway. Soldiers go home. Uniforms are folded. Civilian clothes replace insignia. Generals remain behind, watching as power migrates away from divisions and into conferences, cables, and treaties. The language of force gives way to the language of diplomacy. Decisions now travel slower, but reach farther. Eisenhower's broader strategy comes into focus over time. He works to avoid immediate war not because he doubts American strength, but because he understands its sources. Strength must be rebuilt deliberately, economically, politically. Alliances must be preserved, not tested to destruction. Unity, once fractured, is expensive to restore. His aim is not speed, but endurance. The trade becomes visible. Restraint today can purchase strength tomorrow. Avoiding a premature clash allows industries to recover, publics to stabilize, alliances to formalize. But this bargain offers little comfort to those who wanted certainty immediately, those who believe danger should be confronted before it matures. Patton belongs to that camp, even in silence. The irony deepens with time. Patton's fear of the Soviet Union helps define the era that follows. The Cold War takes shape along the very fault lines he identified. Yet he is sidelined from influencing how that confrontation is managed. His vision lingers, his methods rejected, his presence diminished. History moves forward without consulting its prophets. Patton watches from the margins as the shadow he warned about stretches across Europe, slow and unmistakable. He was early, he was loud, and in the end, he was left holding the record of wars already fought, while the next one begins without him. In the years that follow, a quiet transformation takes place. The West does rebuild Germany, carefully, deliberately, and under conditions that would have frustrated Patton. West Germany emerges not as a resurrected battlefield power, but as an institutional one. Its strength is expressed through currency reform, parliamentary government, and integration into Western economic systems. Germany does become a shield, but it is a political and economic barrier first, a military one only much later. In this sense, Patton's destination is partially reached. Germany stands between East and West. Soviet pressure is checked. Central Europe stabilizes along a line that hardens into doctrine. But the method Patton argued for is decisively rejected. There is no rapid rearmament of defeated formations, no moral shortcut, no immediate inversion of enemy and ally. The shield is built slowly, through proof rather than assertion. The paradox at the heart of the settlement is unavoidable. The defeated are reintegrated, but only after time has passed, after institutions have changed, after loyalty is demonstrated rather than assumed. Former enemies are not reused, they are transformed. The process is slower than Patton would have tolerated, but it carries something his plan lacked: legitimacy that survives scrutiny. With distance, Eisenhower's refusal begins to look less like hesitation and more like insulation. By saying no when momentum demanded yes, he prevents the peace from being poisoned by immediate expediency. He allows the moral verdict of the war to remain intact long enough to become credible again. Germany's return to standing is not an erasure of guilt, but a redefinition of identity. The evidence of this shift is not dramatic. It is almost invisible. Civilians clear rubble where tanks once idled. Shops reopen along streets once cratered by artillery. Children walk to schools rebuilt stone by stone. No ceremony marks the pivot. No declaration announces that history has turned. It simply does, quietly, without triumph. This is how long strategies reveal themselves, not in decisive moments, but in sustained ones. What matters is not only what can be done at peak strength, but what can be justified when strength fades, what alliances can absorb without splintering, what populations will support without coercion. Strategy, in this view, is not an act. It is an endurance test. The listener is left with a difficult conclusion. Patton was not wrong about the direction of history. The Cold War does come. The Soviet Union does become the defining challenge of the age. Germany does become central to that confrontation. But being early is not the same as being right. Diagnosis does not excuse prescription. Patton wanted to act while the world was still pliable, before memory hardened into restraint. Eisenhower chose to let memory do its work, to allow the meaning of victory to settle before building the next structure on top of it. One approach offered certainty at speed, the other offered durability at cost. The tension remains unresolved because history itself does not issue verdicts cleanly. Patton may have seen the Cold War sooner than most, but right for the wrong reasons is still dangerous. And in the long aftermath of victory, it was not urgency that defined the peace, but the refusal to let fear rewrite it too quickly. The story returns to its first, uncomfortable question. After the most morally charged war in modern history, can the defeated be recruited without dissolving the meaning of victory itself? Can yesterday's enemy be transformed into tomorrow's instrument without turning justice into convenience? The question does not fade with time, it deepens. Patton's logic remains hard and unyielding. He believes threats must be anticipated, not awaited. That advantage, once surrendered, rarely returns. To him, armies are instruments, meant to be used while they are sharp, not admired after they rust. History, in his view, punishes hesitation far more reliably than aggression. Eisenhower's logic is different in kind. It is slower, heavier, and less forgiving of shortcuts. Victory, he believes, must remain morally legible, or it ceases to be an ending at all. If the reasons for fighting can be rewritten immediately, then war becomes perpetual, each conflict justified by the next one waiting beyond it. Restraint, in this sense, is not weakness. It is boundary. The irony resolves here. Both men fear the Soviet Union. Both see the shape of the coming struggle. But only one fears what the West might become if it abandons its own verdict too quickly. Patton worries about losing momentum. Eisenhower worries about losing meaning. One thinks in terms of advantage. The other thinks in terms of consequence. There is a quieter truth beneath their arguments. Veterans returning home carry a grief that does not fit strategy. They want the war to stay ended. They want graves to remain final. No map, no intelligence estimate, no future threat can fully erase that human limit. Democracies are bound by it, whether planners acknowledge it or not. History's judgment, when it comes, is rarely decisive in the way commanders prefer. It does not award medals for foresight alone. It rewards endurance, coherence, and the ability to stop fighting when stopping matters most. The nations that survive are often not the ones that strike first, but the ones that know when force has said enough. In the end, this is not a story about who was right, but about what was preserved. The world did enter a long confrontation. It did so without immediately undoing the moral settlement of the war that preceded it. That restraint carried its own costs, but it also prevented victory from collapsing into reflex. They wanted to use the defeated to stop the next enemy, until one man said no and made peace the harder battle.